Kalla mig tungelsjötrågnís auðsugjútuns ölsólar bölvilsinn völur vörðn á fjarðar sinn himins hvaðar troll nema það skuld kalla mig skipsmíð víðurs guðskjáfrötuð gröp og kneppan vigsel bera óðskap múða hagsmíð bragar hvaðar skald nema það hvaðar skald nema það Veit ofan heimdalar ljóð og Orgon forsig
Thank you. Spasiba. Welcome. It's lovely to be back in St. Petersburg. Always lovely to come here. And thank you all for coming. So, tonight I am going to, this is going to be a little bit of a different night than the other times some of you might have seen me, and the other times I've been here with WARDRUNA. Tonight I'm going to, of course, sing some songs for you, but I'm also going to talk quite a bit. I'm going to talk about a little bit about myself, a little bit about how I work, why I work in a specific way, and also I'm going to talk a little bit about the instruments I use and the stories behind, and of course give you some insights into the songs we perform with WARDRUNA and stuff that I made for Vikings and other things. So, unless you don't know, my name is EINAR SELVIK. Yeah, well, some of you might have forgotten. I am a musician and composer from Norway. I come from west of Norway, from a small inland island right north of a city called Bergen. And this is where I was born and where I grew up. When people picture Norway, they see the mountains and the fjords, and this is the typical postcard Norway. That's where I grew up, basically. I've been a musician. I've been a musician since I was very small. When I was 3 years old, I was totally obsessed by drums, which is my main instrument, and was for many years. Whenever I would see drums, I would go totally crazy. And luckily I had people in my family who also did music, and that allowed me to get my hands on a drum kit when I was very young and beat the shit out of them, basically. It was medicine. I think it saved me in my teens. But I never really liked playing other people's music. That was clear from the beginning. So that was kind of, I think that was part of what inspired me to learn to play other instruments. So I learned how to play guitar and bass and those more traditional instruments. So I could make songs that I could play. Drums too, basically. And played in many metal bands for many years, Norwegian black metal and that stuff. But I've always, since I was a small child, been into classical music and also traditional music. That's always been very close to my heart. And yeah, I grew up with lots of music in my home. And another thing I had in my upbringing, because as some of you know, I have a very big passion for history. I am, yeah, that's sort of my, next to music, that's what really drives me and inspires me is history and tradition and old traditions. And when I was growing up, I was lucky enough to have people around me in my family, in my close family, who were very much into history and knew lots of stuff about the sagas and yeah, that part of our history. So whenever we were on vacation, or if it was just like a walk in nature, I would always get these stories about what had happened here 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And I guess at the time I didn't really think that much about it, but in later time, when I found this interest on my own, like in my early teens, when I really started to go into the Norse mythology and all of that on my own, then I saw that all of these stories I had been told when I was a child, I think they created some images and some feelings that stuck, that I kept. And that's what I discovered at that point, that all of these things were still there. It had given me a sense of roots. It had given me a sense of a place in history. And that's something I'm very, very grateful for. And so when you learn about Viking history and Old Norse mythology in schools in Norway, you really learn it in a bad way. It's basically the way they teach it. I know a lot of people that aren't from Norway, they think that in Norway everybody knows a lot about the Vikings and Norse mythology, but that's not true. Most people don't know anything about it, and they don't care either. And that's part of how we teach our children these things, because basically they teach it in a way that makes it impossible to take serious. It's very oversimplified. The gods are squeezed into these cartoon figures that is just silly or demonized. But thankfully, things are starting to change now. and people are taking it more serious. We are taking our history back more and more, so that's a good thing. But that was not the case when I learned about these things in school. And I think one of the things that fascinated me really much was how different it was. When I learned about how the old mythology worked in the Viking Age, for instance, or even before that, it was very different to our modern way of thinking. For instance, there were no all-knowing, almighty gods, just good or just evil. Things interact. They were more like humans, or like nature. In nature, there is nothing that is evil or good. Everything is everything, and things. It's not static. That's something that's changeable. And also another thing is that they didn't look at time as a line. They thought about it as a circle, like nature. And of course, that's the point. All of these traditions, all of these myths, all of these gods and goddesses, they are born out of our surroundings, out of nature. That's where they dwell, in us and in our surroundings. And these stories are to explain us, to tell us how things work, how they connect, how we connect to it, and how we possibly can connect to something bigger than ourselves. Whether or not it's a spiritual thing or a philosophical thing, it doesn't really matter. At some point in my teens, I really felt the need to do something different, because my passion for history, my passion for my roots, and that became just stronger and stronger and more personal, I think. And that made me want to, well, basically I decided to quit all my other musical projects and start over again, because I felt I really had to do something that was more in line with my heart and my passion. And so I decided to make this project called WARDRUNA. And basically the idea was that I wanted to interpret all of these themes, all of these stories and symbols. I wanted to interpret them on their own premises. I didn't want to just use some lyrics or some pictures. I wanted to use relevant instruments, sounds. I wanted to record in relevant settings, outdoor or in holy places, or use the sounds of trees or stones or fire and so on. And basically it wasn't about trying to copy the past in any way. It was about taking something old that still resonates today, something that we still can learn something from. It's worth remembering. So taking some of these old things and make something new with it. If you want to sow a seed and make something grow, you need to look ahead. But it's also important to know where you come from. Don't climb in a tree that doesn't have roots. So I started making rune songs. Now runes are, that's basically the oldest alphabet, the writing system that we had in the north. At some point you had it here as well for a period in time. And basically the word rune in its oldest form, the root of the word ru means something like create sound. That's what it means. In later time, for instance, the Viking Age, the word could mean different things. Of course, it meant a letter, like a writing system that had a sound, but it could also mean knowledge or wisdom. It could mean a secret or to whisper. It could mean a magical song, and it could also mean or each of the runes had a symbolic value and a name. And the reason why we know this is because of a set of rune poems that we have that are very old. And these rune poems, I really like them because they are like riddles, like an enigma. So each of these rune riddles, they don't tell you any truth. They don't say what they are exactly. They teach in a way. They teach in a way that when you read these verses, you're left with 10 new questions, basically. And I think that's a very good way of learning. Truth is never served on a silver platter. And anything of any value here in life comes at a cost. So I think that's a very good way of learning, that you have to reach for it. You have to use your head. You have to think yourself. I'm going to shut up soon. But I'm gonna sing one of these rune songs for you. And it's a song called, based on the rune for the letter F. The rune is called Fe, or Fehu, in the oldest form. And Fehu, it basically means cattle, or cows. But it also means, because that's a way of measuring wealth, or how rich you are. So it can mean money, it can mean gold, it can mean a gift. And the lyrics I wrote for this song is based on these rune poems, and together with my own words. And basically what this poem is saying that being rich is beautiful, it's wonderful. But being rich is also what causes family to become enemies, friends to become enemies, nations to become enemies. And one of the poems also hints towards this myth of the Linen Orm, or the Linen Serpent, or Linen Snake, dragon, is a mythical being, a creature that we see in different myths. And one of the qualities of having a Linen Orm is that if it sleeps upon your gold, the gold grows. But of course there is a backside to this, and that is that the snake grows also equally. So you get a lot of money, but you get a big dragon to handle, basically. And I think that's a very fitting and beautiful image of what wealth and being rich potentially is. This is fair. Thank you so much. This is an instrument called kravik lyra. It's a lyra or a lyre. This one it's called kravik lyra because it's found on a farm in a place called Kravik in Norway. This instrument type is many, many thousand years old. They had it in ancient Persia, in ancient Egypt, Greece, all across Europe, the British Isles, and also in Scandinavia, like way back before Viking Age and up and through medieval times. This instrument has been present. It's an instrument that is not so much connected with like the folk musician, the folk music tradition. It's more connected with an oral tradition, the tradition of poetry, of songs, and stories. And that is what it does, this instrument does so effortlessly as well. Accompany songs and poetry and stories. And this is what it has been used for in this time as well. And of course, if the skalds of the old times had an instrument, this would be it, in a way. Of course, in that period, you have to remember, if you ever read an Old Norse poem, you weren't really supposed to read it. It's something you were supposed to hear or experience, whether or not it's somebody singing it to you or reading or speaking it to you, or if it's acted like theater or a ritual context, or we don't know. It can be all of these things. But this was primarily an oral society. It was not a literal society. So the power of words and the power of poetry, how it was constructed, how the words play, is the effect of that is we can't even imagine it today, because it's so different. The skald was not only a poet or a singer. The skald was the news forecaster. He was she was the genealogist who knew your family lines hundreds and hundreds years back. They were they could take many forms, but they had an important part of society, of bringing news. And even, just to give an example of how powerful poetry was back then, is if you wrote libel poetry, that's need song or need verse. It means shaming. It means if I didn't like my king, and I did a poem about him, calling him an asshole or stupid, I could be punished by death. Not because of the king having his feelings hurt or anything, but because the power of words, if somebody said it, it was true, in a sense. The power that these poets had and this form of performance was, you can't really compare it. Didn't have to be true. Could be fake news, you know, which is something we know these days. Yeah, so this instrument is basically, it's not based on an archaeological finding. It was not found in the ground, the original. It was basically found by 150 years ago, approximately. There was this famous Norwegian painter who traveled around Norway. And he came to this farm in Kravik in Numedal in Norway. And one late night, probably over a bottle of vodka or something, perhaps not vodka in Norway, maybe beer or mead, but still, I'm sure they were drunk. Basically, the people who lived there, they came and said one late evening, "Hey, do you want to see something really old?" And of course, he said, "Oh yeah." And they came with this. Not this, but one that looks like this, without the lid. But apart from that, it was in perfect condition. And you can see the original in one of the museums outside Oslo today. It's basically from the 1500s, but the instrument type is of course many thousand years old, as I explained. You can play it like a harp, like a small harp, when you pluck the strings, or you can play it like I did on Fair, strum and stop. And what I'm basically doing is I'm just stopping, I'm muting the strings. I don't want to sound, and by doing that, I can make chords. It's very similar to instruments that you have and had here in Russia as well, like kankles or gusli, I think you call it. It's basically the same principle of stopping and strumming and plucking. Same principle of the instrument, which is also connected for thousands of years with oral tradition. Still is where they have it as a living tradition. I'm going to sing another rune song for you, and like I said, what's really at the heart and at the core of Old Norse way of viewing the world is circular thinking. Everything moves in cycles. Of course, you have Thor and Odin and Frey and Frigg and all of these gods, but they are nothing compared to the sun, the life-giving sun, which is so central that it's somehow this story of the sun rising and going down, being born and dying, being born and dying, every day, every year, is something that you see some way or another. Some places it's only hidden or camouflaged by gods or something like that, but you see it in almost all the great Old Norse myths. So this is very central. So I'm going to sing a song for you now about the sun. It's a song called Sovelu, and it explains one of these myths where the sun is being pulled in a chariot or in a wagon by horses with magical runes on their hoofs, and she's being chased by wolves. And of course, at some point, the wolves catches the sun and swallows it. Yet she resurrects, and a newborn day arrives. Skøpaskaldu
skinandi röð, ísar aldrei, hverfandi hver, skotum heitir ulfur, fagra kvel fylgja, dröslar draga, skínanda góði. Sólin heitir, stönd fyrir sól og brím og björg brönna, född hann í frá skildi hvað ristna, aurár vakur hófi allsinn, köli sem hverfa. Sólin heitir, stönd fyrir sól og brím og björg brenna, född hann í frá skildi hvað ristna, aurár vakur hófi allsinn, köli sem hverfar svo velur, svo Thank you. Are you all right? Good, good. You can just mute it. This is a taglharpa, or in Finland they call it jouhikku. In Estonia they call it talharpa. In Sweden they call it stråkharpan. Or yeah, it has many different names. This is basically the oldest bowed instrument that we have in the north. The name taglharpa, it basically tagl, that means horsehair. So it's basically a horsehair harp, because the strings are made of horsehair. So this would be a very accessible instrument. It's very simple and very easy to build yourself. You can basically just take a piece of wood, a whole piece, if it's this thick, and then you just carve out this piece and make a hole here, put a lid on it, go to cut some horsehair, and there you go. But it's best if you ask. Just saying, I don't want people to go out and do bad stuff.
But yeah, this would be very accessible and cheap. And that's one of the reasons why I think it was quite common as well. It's using toggle strings, horsehair strings on these instruments as well would be something. Using gut is actually not so old in Northern Europe. That's more further south, they use more gut. Of course, they could use sinews, and if you had money, you would use metal, brass or bronze, I presume. But that back then, it was a very valuable thing. You couldn't just go to the store and buy it like you can now. So it had a completely different, yeah, in any case, this is, these instruments, they have either 2, 3, or 4 strings. We don't know exactly how old, we don't know, for instance, if the Vikings had these, or if it came right after, because we can't really prove how long they used bows, basically. We know for a fact that by the end of year 1100, then they used instruments like this, but we don't know for sure if it's how far back it goes. And of course, this is also an instrument of common history between where I come from and where you come from, and especially if you look a little bit further east, throughout Siberia and over in the Tuva and that region, you see instruments like this still being used. And in the north, it was a living tradition as well up until early 1900s, especially in Finland. They kept it for the longest time, and then it disappeared for maybe 50, 60 years, and then in the 1960s, then people started using them again. The thing with using nature instruments is that they are very, how to say, they're very gentle. That means that they're very, if it's hot or if it's cold or if it's moist in the air, they change all the time. So it's a lot of tuning. And I once talked with one of the oldest fiddlers in Norway, traditional musicians. He's a legend. And he said he's been playing his fiddle for, he's been a fiddler for 60, 70 years now, and he said, but he has been tuning for 50 of them. And that's kind of the case. It's a lot of tuning. So just talk amongst yourself for now. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Fucking hell. Okay, now we can do sound. This is an instrument that is so limited in what you can and cannot do on it. So basically whatever I'm doing here is authentic. This is, just doing this is going back in time, almost 1,000 years. Think about that. I'm going to play a song now. It's about wind and it's about sorcery. This is a vindavla. Thank you. This is a goat horn. We call it bukkehorn. It's one of the oldest wind instruments we have, and there is actually a living tradition of using these in Norway and also in Sweden, either from goats or from cow horns. And also the birch bark longhorns, the wooden lure, we call it. And all of these instruments are connected, where they survive, where the use of this instrument survived, is basically by shepherds and shepherdesses, female and male. So basically they use these, this is basically an instrument used to communicate over long distances. So this is basically the mobile phone of the old times. So this would be like an I-horn 5, because it has 5 holes. It's a little bit old, I know, but I can't afford the new one. So I think the oldest finding we have of an instrument like this is from a bog in Sweden. And it's dated to around year 400 or 500, something like that. And it also had these playing holes, same as this, 3 holes. And judging by how they are placed and the sound they would create in that size of horn, it's basically the same, more or less the same tuning as we still use today. So also what you hear today with this horn is also a time travel. These are the sounds that have been roaming in the mountains of Norway and Sweden for thousands of years. So they also used them to call back the animals when they were out in the pastures. And they also knew that certain times of the week, they knew that they would be in audible distance to the next pastures. So they could send messages. It could be anything, like, I have a sick cow, or I have a dead cow. I'm lonely. I want my mommy. Could be anything, yeah. Well, people are people. Could be a booty call, for all we know. People are people, like I said, have been like that for all times. There is this old poem saying that because, and the reason I should say that first, they used also instruments like this, but mostly without the playing holes or the long lures. They used them to scare predators, like wolves and bears, to scare them away. And there is this old poem saying that the bear, he hates the sound of the lure, but he loves the sound of the goat horn. And when you hear the sound, it is like it's calling you, like it's luring you in. Look is the word. Look. It's also connected to lock song, a very old song traditions that also you find out in both in calling animals, but also calling spirits, conjuring spirits. In Sweden they call it kulning. Some of you might have heard about it. Anyways, I'm going to play something for you now. And the thing with, like I said, these nature instruments, they have a will of their own. And it's not always easy to know what you're going to get. Because it's very vulnerable to temperature and moist and all of that. So there's been a few occasions where I've been playing a WARDRUNA concert, and where it's been cold outside and the horn has been lying on the floor or somewhere for the whole concert, and then I pick it up and plan to do some epic horn play, and basically end up sounding like a sick cow. But that's the thing, and that's what I love about it as well. Now I've learned, but in the beginning, yeah, it was quite embarrassing. But now I know that when I pick up this horn, I know that I have to be prepared for anything. I know that I don't actually know how it's going to behave until the first note. Then I know how, if I have to adjust my fingers or my breath. So. It behaved, thankfully. Sometimes I make music for this TV show called Vikings. Oh, that and there we go. Yeah, sometimes I make music for Vikings. And Vikings, I don't know if you know it. Do you know it? Yeah. Well, Vikings, for those of you who do not know it, Vikings is a TV show about Vikings. It's true. It's true, man. I shit you not. Yeah, I'm gonna tell you something. I don't know if you know this, but Viking is actually a verb. It's not something you are, it's something you do. So, they weren't Vikings. They did Viking. They traveled in Viking. To go Viking, basically. They went Viking. And that means to travel out. Whether or not it's for trade, or just explore, or war, or pillage, or steal, be pirates, basically. That's what they were, also, pirates. So that's what Viking is. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use the word Viking with WARDRUNA, is because I actually don't like the word that much. I think it's a little bit stereotypical, and it's also, it would be wrong to base a whole culture on something that a few people did for a very short amount of time, a short period of time. Viking Age is just a small part, and it was done by just a small amount of people. So for me, I prefer to use the word Norse. I think that because that encompasses every part of the tradition, the culture, way before that time. And to be honest, I don't really find the Viking Age to be that interesting either. For me, it's a time where things are changing. It's changing really fast. People are losing their ways. It's more about money. It's more about being famous, and it's more superficial things that become important. Another thing I'll tell you about the Vikings, or the people living in that period, is because this is something I find, if I have to pick one thing that I think is irritating with the TV show, it is that they made the decision to make all the Vikings wear black and be dirty, and all the British people, they wear color and they are clean and nice hair. But it was the other way around, you know? And we know this for a fact. The Vikings, they were very vain, and they were probably the cleanest people in Europe at the time. And they loved bling, like gold and rings and jewelry, and they were like really pansies with colorful clothes, and they loved it. And we know this, one of the reasons we know it is because it's written in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles that the women in England, they preferred the Vikings. They didn't like the British man because they smelled worse. So, back to Vikings. It's about this guy called Ragnar Lodbrok and his sons and brothers, And Ragnar might have been a very famous person at some point. We don't know for sure. We know that quite a few of the other characters and his sons and also the character Rollo, we know that this is a real person. Although Rollo is not his birth name. His birth name is Rolf. And Rollo was what he was called by the French when he got married in France and became a king there, basically. That's when he was called Rollo. Anyway, Ragnar, there is a lot of stories and poems about Ragnar. And one of the most famous poems is from a time when he's thrown into a pit of snakes. And which is quite dramatic, of course. And he does what any brave person from Norway, at least, would do, and that is do some poetry. Which makes perfect sense. And I'm going to sing this poem for you now. It's called Ormagalskvedi, or that's what I call the song. Basically means snake pit poetry. So well. Old poetry is very is something I respect very much. These old traditions, I can't even come close when I write my lyrics to follow all the rules and all the way of constructing this poetry. Frankly, the modern Norwegian language is too poor to do it, and the old poets were too good, basically. Some of these poems are so complicated. Like the most complicated way is something called drottkveit, and it's basically they always talked or wrote in images. And these are, so a warrior could be a raven feeder, for instance. All sorts of images. And these drottkveit, sometimes it's like an image on top of an image on top of an image. So basically to decode what they are actually saying takes a long time and a lot of analyzing. And some poems we don't understand at all, actually, what they mean. So basically, a skald, he could offend the king, and the king wouldn't notice until a couple of days after that. Wait a minute. I'm going to sing one of my very, very favorite, one of my most beloved Old Norse poems. It's a poem called Vörlusbá, and Vörlusbá means the prophecy of the seers. It is the poem where we get familiar with the term Ragnarok. And Ragnarok is not doomsday. It's not Armageddon, like this linear Christian way of thinking. It's not the end of the world. Remember, this is cycles. It's describing a cycle. And basically what it's describing is something we have seen throughout history all over this planet. We see the birth of a civilization, its growth, and its end. At some point it collapses and dies, and then make room for new. So it's talking about this cycle of life and death again. The poem is over 50 verses long, so brace yourselves. No, I'm not gonna take them all, but I'll do a few. So, this is Vörlusbá. Thank you. I'm going to do one last song for you tonight. And this song is really at the heart and the core of everything I do, basically. Why I do it. Because for me, it's not about this romantic idea that, ooh, everything was much better back in the days. I don't think it was. Maybe some things were better and some things were worse. In any case, for me, it would be stupid to try and just copy the past. The logical thing is to learn from the past and do it better. You know? That's the whole point with all of these ideas, that the only reason why I do it is basically because they are still relevant. They are born out of the same surroundings that we still surround us with. That's why they still resonate. That's why we still can learn from them. And yeah, I don't think your roots are important just because they are your roots. It needs to carry relevance. It's not about, ooh, my gods are better than your gods, or that whole bullshit, or attempting to politicize religion or personal beliefs. I think we should be better than that, smarter than that today, potentially. Information is there, so it's basically, we always have a choice. Now, there are many things that we don't have anymore. For instance, in my case, where I come from, we used to have songs. We used to have lots of songs for all sorts of occasions. Most of them are gone. We have bits and pieces. When you were born into this world, you were welcomed with songs. When you were sowing the fields, there were songs. When you were reaping them, there were songs. Picking apples, or spinning threads, or baking bread, or there were songs. And also, when somebody died, you were sung across to the other side. You were guided. Which had an effect both for the people who sang, who followed them across to the other side, but also to the dying, to show the way, basically, and to let go. That's basically the duality of it, the thought behind it. And this This song is sort of born out of that idea. Who is going to sing me across the day I die? The old songs are gone, so we should make new ones. Singing is medicine. Singing brings people together in a totally unique way. Songs have potential to carry emotions and knowledge like no other form of art. And being the song when you are, as you are when you are singing it has a great effect. So you should all sing more. This is a song about death. It's a song about dying. It's a song about remembering somebody you have lost and miss. It's a song about crossing over to the other side. And it's a song about letting go. This is a song called Helvägen. Sångarna sökte, sångarna sände. Då den djupaste gav mig droppar så ranne av valfaders barn. Allt veit eg I varje En ortstyr dör aldrig, kvämar ser gådan getu. Dör fe, döja frönder, dör självrit sama. Jag vet EINAR aldrig dör, domrum dödan kvar. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow. It's yeah. It's quite overwhelming to come here to so many different countries and to come here and the fact that so many people wanted to come, and also when we play with WARDRUNA, it's totally amazing and mind-blowing, the fact that these things resonate with so many people. That means a lot. It comes from the heart, and it has to come from the heart to reach the heart. That's the way it works. And that's what this is about as well. This performance, if you want to call it that. It's more a conversation. I'm not trying to be anyone else than myself. I'm here just talking about what I do and what I think and my work. So I didn't plan to sing anything more, but I will tell you one thing. Some of you might know, but we are coming back here with WARDRUNA in April to do I'm very happy about that. We're doing a very special concert here in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. It will be, we will perform new music, and we also plan to do something special with extra musicians, with a choir and with some orchestral instrumentation. So I hope to see you in April, basically. Well, you're sitting here still. Well, yeah, okay, I'll do it once. This is my version of a song. It's a very old fiddle song from Norway called Gravbakken. It means the burial hill. It is, of course, made for Hardanger fiddle. And the story of the song is basically that the guy who wrote it, he wrote it for his own funeral. And the song was premiered over his casket by his oldest son. And yet the song lives still, and so does the musician who created it in a way. So I made some lyrics and made my own version of this song. Tonar gröt, här är kallt och svartormen rir. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Enjoy the evening.